Do number 2, and then I'll be done reviewing cards and go back to actually playing games and uploading them probably next week. I have been already testing with this first new agenda. So this is what people call the bin pack. This is the things we do for love, the last product that Fantasy Flight released for the game, and probably the last official release of anything for Game of Thrones that's ever going to come out. And all these cards got banned, so I'm not gonna bother to go through all of them. They're just very weird and in a lot of cases very broken, stupid, overpowered. Like I noticed the very first one I looked is Sir Davos Seaworth here. He's 5/5 with all three icons. He just cannot be killed. Like, okay, that seems fair. Here, this is a 4-cost attachment that just takes control, but it sacrifices at the dominance phase. I don't know. I'm like, we're not going to go over it. They're all banned. That's fine. But they decided to keep these agendas legal. I guess the agendas were considered balanced enough and interesting enough, which I don't. None of these are super interesting. These are not like mechanically complex agendas like trading with cohort or something like that. But they are usable. And I will note that Aloof and Apart appears to be sort of the new default agenda that everyone is just making an Aloof and Apart deck. So House Aaron did finally get an agenda here. This is the House Aaron agenda. And I mean, I guess Lysa Aaron costs 6, so there is some degree of like thematic House Aaron something there. But basically what this agenda says is just play big guys. That's what this agenda is about. And it combos with the new unique Great Hall that you just get on turn 1 with At the Gates, and then every turn you can play big characters for -4. That's pretty straightforward. Does not need a lot of explanation, I don't think, as to why that's good. You can compare it to Fealty, where Fealty is only -1 and kneels your faction card, but is more versatile. It could reduce the cost of any loyal card. So there's a question of comparing this to like Fealty or other economy agendas, whether this is better or not. Most people seem to have just defaulted to assuming this is better. I would say this is easily the most common agenda I've faced online already. Again, not a very large sample size, but I've seen plenty of these. But I don't think that it's necessarily overpowered. I think it's probably good, and people are playing it because it's straightforward, it's simple, it doesn't take a whole lot of, practicing and refining your deck and whatever. You can probably just throw in the good characters that cost a lot of money from every faction and, get your Great Hall and then put all the other good cards in there and your deck will be fine. You don't have to do anything special. And the drawback is that each character you control with printed cost 6 or higher gains prized 1, which I don't know how much that matters really. I'd like to comment on that, but it just will take some more playing to see how that shakes out and whether that ends up being like a worthwhile drawback or not. I will say that that's a drawback that matters a lot later in the game. Like giving people a few free power early in the game is not a big deal. It's like, who cares? So what you're doing there is you're getting a big advantage up front. You're making it a lot easier to get your important characters into play from the start of the game in exchange for, a potential disadvantage way later in the game. But the idea is if you get far ahead to start with, then that drawback's never going to matter because you're just going to be able to snowball. So I can see where people think it's strong in that respect. Dark Wings, Dark Words. This is a first edition agenda. I know the Long Voyage was also in first edition. I'm not sure about the other two. I think Knights of the Realm was. If this was in the first game, it was after my time. I did play first edition a little bit, many, many years ago, not very much. Anyways, I know people love this agenda from first edition. I'm not sure how this compares to the old versions of the cards in first edition. I'm not going to go back and look those up. But the way that this works is it's another 75 cards deck, and it's similar to, I think, Valyrian Steel, except for events instead of attachments. You cannot put more than one copy of each event in your deck, and it's after you play an event, draw one card, limit 3 times per round. And that's all there is to it. Honestly, I find it hard to get excited by this. I think you're going to end up stacking a bunch of one-of neutral events into your deck. Your deck's going to be really inconsistent. It'll be hard to have any coherent theme or strategy to it besides just play all your events and squeeze whatever value out of them that you can. Uh, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of blah. Maybe you make this and you play like the event plots that have been rebalanced. What is the one that lets you play out of the discard pile? Annals of Castle Black and Littlefinger's Meddling, and then you use that to like draw your whole deck somehow. I don't know. We'll see what happens. It doesn't. I'll be honest. It doesn't seem that great to me. The limit of only being able to have one copy of each event is kind of the killer, because there's plenty of extremely strong events where you can think of, oh well, drawing a card every time you play those, that's great, that's really good. But only being able to play those killer events once, and then, all right, well, you drew a card, but the next card that you drew is not going to be as good as the one that you just played. You'd rather have more copies of that event, but you can't. That's kind of an issue there. Knights of the Realm, finally a knight trade agenda. While you control more knight characters than each other player, increase the number of cards you draw in the draw phase by 1. And if you control fewer, then you reduce it. So if you have the same number of knight characters, like if you both just have 0, then this doesn't do anything. But if you have more, then you can draw more cards. But having fewer knight characters and only drawing 1 is a big risk that you would want to avoid. So first off, this will be meta dependent, because it will depend how many knight characters can you expect to run into in like any random deck that you go up against. I honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. It's going to depend on faction a lot. So if you have like certain factions that you don't want to, that you want to have a better matchup against, for example, let's say you're scared of Martell and Night's Watch, then you run this agenda. Those factions aren't going to have a ton of knights, but let's say the faction you're trying to play against is Tyrell. Well, maybe you should be careful about this agenda then, because Tyrell has the most knight characters in the game by a good amount. And like a lot of good knight characters too. Martell actually has a reasonable number of knight characters. It's just none of them really ever get played, because they don't go along with the faction's typical strategy. And this is also a very faction like dependent agenda in terms of which faction your deck is going to be playing with it. I've got the knight trait pulled up here, and I did the math on how many knights there are for every faction. There is one knight card that's not a character. Sir Pounce has the knight trait, but he's an attachment. Unfortunately, the agenda does specify characters, so Sir Pounce doesn't count. That would have been cool if it just said knight cards, because he's the only non-character. It would have been funny if you could count Sir Pounce. But yeah, and it's tough because there's not hardly any there's not very many neutral knights either. Lyn Corbree's not a great card, I guess, splashing a 1 of in a dedicated knight deck. You could, you could justify that, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. The Unlikely Champions and the Hedge Knights, I mean, at least if you have the Lord and Ladies to turn this on, I think you can justify having 3 each of these. But that's still, that's what, 7 cards? And if you want a copy of Barrack, which is questionable whether you would want to try and pay for him or not, I guess maybe 8 if you throw in Barrack. And even then, that's going to make it very difficult. Obviously, Greyjoy has literally 1 knight character. I like to try to make the agendas work out of every faction when I play them. I think I'm just not going to be able to try and do a Knights of the Realm for Greyjoy. Can't justify it. And Night's Watch, similarly, only has 4. Targaryen only has 3. And these are all unique. So again, even if you're throwing in as much neutral support as possible, it would still just be hard with Night's Watch or Targaryen. Maybe you could barely make it work if you really went hardcore and put maybe 2 copies each of these knight characters from those factions, but I'm just very skeptical. I think you could probably make it work with the other 5. The way that the counts break down, it's Baratheon 12, Lannister 11, Martell 10. Those are all kind of the same. Stark is 7, but I think there's 2 that are non-unique. Tumblestone, and yeah, House Manderly. So if you wanted to have like winter plots to justify the House Manderly Knight, then with these and the, the Unlikely Champions, at that point you could have 12 non-unique knights in your deck, with 9 of them costing 2 gold. I think that would be fine at that point for Stark if you throw in a few more of these unique Stark knights on top of them. You could probably barely get away with that. And then Tyrell, of course, is probably the easiest faction to play with this agenda. Not only do they have 5 million knights, they have a lot of good ones, and they have some small non-unique chumps, like Arbor Knight, Harbor Knight's not the only one, is he? Yeah, Sir Colin's only a 2 cost. They've got a bunch of 3 costs. No one's going to mind playing the Green Apple Knight, and so forth and so on. And, oh, Jousting Knight, that's a 2 cost. This is a questionable card, but yeah. The reason I emphasize having cheap and non-unique is so that if you need to activate your agenda, you can just slap down 1 or 2 gold and put one of these little dudes out there. And you don't have to make a choice between, oh, am I going to pay for, this big knight that this is not the optimal time to play him, such as, maybe 6 cost Garland. You don't want to put all your gold in this one card on a given turn, but if you don't play him, then you're not going to have any knights, or you're not going to have enough, and your agenda won't be active. I think it will be important to have a cheap option to just say, oh, I'm just going to put down a chump real fast to turn on the agenda. Having a range of knight characters in different costs there. And the barrier is finding small, cheap, non-unique knights. I think there's plenty of bigger ones that are unique that can be like that are towards the higher end of the cost range if you want to play those. Yeah, Baratheon's got the Vanguard Lancers. Does Lannister have anything? I mean, Lancel's 2. They don't really have that many cheap knights, but they have a bunch of playable knight characters. They could do it. Martell, again, actually has a decent number of knight characters. I just don't know if you would ever, because, how do I say this? If you're playing Martell, a typical Martell deck does not want to play most of these cards. I think the House Ironwood Knight is a maybe, and Archibald Ironwood, you probably are fine with having him around. But the rest of these, I don't think a normal Martell deck really wants to play them at all. Maybe Sir Cletus. I've seen him, as a one-of. I guess he's okay. But if maybe someday we'll make a Martell deck that's not lame, that has a bunch of knights, and it probably won't be any good, but you could try it. The Long Voyage, your minimum deck size is 100 cards. So my default reaction is this agenda's bad, and it's hard for me to think of why you would ever play it. 100 cards is just way too many. Regardless of the quality of the deck, it's just going to be really hard to have a consistent strategy with a deck of that size. You're not going to be able to say, oh, I'm relying on this certain few set of cards to work together, because it's just going to be too inconsistent for you to ever actually draw them, even with drawing an extra per turn, which also kneels your faction card with the reaction. I mean, the bonus is you draw an extra card. Now, in first edition, this agenda was considered overpowered. First of all, I think in first edition, the drawback was less. Your minimum deck size was like 75 or something. But also just draw was so much more powerful in first edition. It was so much harder to match this with other sources. I think in this edition of the game, it's a lot more possible. Like, if you want to draw cards, there's probably better ways to do it and have a different agenda than making your deck 100 cards, which is a uniquely severe drawback. The only other agendas that increase deck size only put it up to 75. This one is 25 more cards than that. That's a lot. It's kind of a big deal. And so even if you wanted to play this agenda, really the only way that you could ever do it is by trying to play like a good cards deck where all of the cards in the deck, none of them need to rely on any of the others in the deck or are like having traits or anything special like that. They're all cards that can come out and just do work on their own. And can like each faction support that? Could you find 100 cards in every faction with the card pool being as enormous as it is now, and including neutral cards also, of course, that work that way, where you can look at any of them and say, all right, well, they don't really need to have any other specific cards. I'm fine just playing them by themselves. Maybe. I'm not sure. The way that I would do this, I'd be inclined to look at those redesigns and see which factions had the most cards redesigned, because that's like the highest power level factions. And so I guess those would be the ones I would look at first to potentially having enough overall good cards to just slap together 100. I don't know, though. It's pretty questionable. The other way that you could try to play it is you could try to make a deck with a lot of what's called tutor cards, which means search either the top 10 cards of your deck, or sometimes something will let you search the entire deck. Basically stuff that lets you search your deck. Then you can get certain cards that you want to go together a bit more reliably. Is there enough of that in the game that can go into this agenda to make that work without, offsetting the points of having it around? I don't know. It's something you could try, I guess. I will say this, the only time I've seen this agenda, someone was trying to play it with Drowned God, which my reaction to that is that's like the opposite. It's like the worst way I can imagine to ever use this agenda, in my opinion, because Drowned God is extremely combo dependent deck. Like you need very specific cards uh, to have in hand and on board together to make that type of deck work. Or like Night's Watch the Wall, you never use this with the wall because then you're just drastically increasing the chance that you're not going to see one of your 3 copies of the wall, and then it's like, what are you doing? You can't ever actually find your win condition. And that was kind of what happened to the Drown God deck I was playing against. He never found Tarly. Like he was never able to play Tarly, and so his deck just kind of floundered and didn't do a whole lot because you kind of need Tarly to make that deck work. So yeah, that's, if you want to have a very focused deck, it's definitely not going to be with this agenda. So the next thing I want to look at is what they say is the Forgotten Heroes, which is the new cards that the design team made. It's like the new pack of cards, which I do like. I like the idea. I like the cards, and makes me excited to imagine that, I'm playing a game that in the future, potentially even more cards like this will eventually come out, and there will still be more content, even if it's not as frequent as before. That's very encouraging. And I do like the designs so far. Again, I haven't actually played with any of these. I don't think they're usable on the Iron Throne yet. Probably they will be soon. But I've looked at them and I can definitely see myself thinking like, oh yeah, these are the types of decks I'm going to put these cards in. This is where I can try them. They seem pretty decent. And none of them look too overpowered at first glance, but I guess, I'm going to be looking back through them here. So if there are any that I was too concerned about, I'll be refreshed. My memory of them will be refreshed as I go down. First is, well, I guess I should also mention what their objectives are. So first they said they wanted to make characters that support underdeveloped themes, like Archmaester Marwyn supporting Maesters. I like that. That's great. I always hate it when you would see a mechanic or a trait or something that looks like it was kind of cool, and you could see there was a little bit of an idea there, but it would have maybe 2 or 3 cards in the entire card pool that did anything with it, and Fantasy Flight would just kind of toss it to the side. That feels bad. If a mechanic or an archetype or a theme is going to be in the game, I think it should be given, a minimum amount of support that someone could try and do something with it. So I appreciate that. The other thing they're doing is they're pushing Bestow. A lot of these, like I've mentioned before, are Bestow or they interact with Bestow, and they do stuff with moving gold around and putting gold on cards. Like you can see here, this Baratheon guy is Bestow. This character, Left Hand Cod, his reaction lets you place gold from the treasury on one of your cards. This is a Bestow. This card gives himself gold and does stuff. This is move 1 gold from your gold pool. There's like Bestow stuff all over the place in this pack. It's very Bestow heavy. And I mean, I'm not super in favor or like I'm pretty neutral about that as my default reaction. Like, okay, well, there's going to be more Bestow cards. Sure, that's fine. Nothing wrong with Bestow. I will say, like, the reason that the Bestow keyword never felt that strong, like cards with Bestow and the idea of like a dedicated Bestow deck that's going to spam gold on all your cards, that was never very good. It never really took off or was viable. There was just like a few individual Bestow cards that got splashed because their effects were powerful enough. It's because the way the mechanic works is you have to pay extra money to use the ability on the card. And that's like such a high cost when the alternative is to just use cards that have good abilities that don't require extra gold. Like whatever ability you're getting from that Bestow keyword has to be extremely overpowered. I mean, maybe overpowered is the wrong word, but it needs to be way better than what you would get on an equivalent card that didn't require you to pay money to use the ability. And usually the abilities were not that much better. It's hard to balance that because if you try to make it way better than what would normally be on a card of whatever cost range, then it's potentially you're going to make something that's too powerful and that's overpowered, and that you'd have to like rebalance it back in the other direction. So I do think that's an inherent issue with it, and I can see where they've tried to make it easier to address that here. Because, for example, let's see, this guy, yeah, after you marshal or play another Knight or R'hllor, he gains a gold. This guy gains gold onto your cards after you win a challenge. And you see, this is gold coming onto these cards from the treasury. It's not from out of your gold pool. And like I think this guy does it too. Yeah, it's after you play an army or knight, he gains a gold. So they're trying to give ways to put gold onto stuff that does not just require you paying for it straight up, which is a better way to do it, I think, or at least makes it more viable because it mitigates that downside of, oh, well, I'm going to play this character that's bestow 3 and cost 4 with a 7 cost card. It's just like, well, I could just play a 4 cost character with a good ability that doesn't want to play a bunch of extra gold onto it. And a few cards like Begging Brother or Astapor, just because of how powerful their effects were. I think Begging Brother is an example of a bestow card that really showed, like, yeah, that was actually strong enough to be worth bestowing it. It really went above and beyond what most 3 cost characters could ever do for you. And we'll see how it works with these new cards here. Enough pontificating about the bestow mechanic itself. Bonifer the Good is 4/3 Baratheon Knight and the 7. And each non-neutral to 7 character you control gains insight. I think he's like a one-of in Baratheon Faith Militant, and it's probably the only time he ever gets used for anything. Maybe a one-of in a Knights of the Realm. Let me see. And it's non-neutral, which is an issue, right? Because it has to be other Baratheons. Like, you can't draw off of Begging Brothers with him. And that would make him a lot more viable, in my opinion, for regular decks. But they limited the range like that. So let's see. What happened? How did it not match? Because Baratheon does not have a ton of the 7 cards, right? Alright, this is bothering me. That's a trait. Isn't the 7 a trait? It's not letting me search for the 7? Man, that feels bad. I wanted to see how many Baratheon the 7 cards there are. I guess I'm not going to be able to. That's too bad. Anyways, I don't think it's very many. I'm going to stick with what I said. Probably, he's a nice one-of for like some very specific decks, but other than that, he won't be used. And that's fine. With how gigantic the card pool is, obviously, the best you could expect from the average card is that it might have 1 or 2 very specific decks that it fits. That's totally okay. Godry the Giant Slayer. This is an interesting card. Again, trait based, so he's cost 2. His power is X equal to the amount of gold he has, and he can get Intimidate with 5 or more gold. Even if he has 4 gold on him, I mean 2 gold for 4 strength is pretty good. 2 gold for 1 strength, actually it's 3 gold for 1 strength if you bestow him, is terrible. So you need to get the gold on him stacked up very quickly without a lot of additional cost in order for him to be worth it. But he could potentially be very strong if you get enough gold stacked. So I think with the traits here, obviously Knight or R'hllor, if you have enough of those traits, which he has both of those traits himself, to quickly get extra gold on him, then you could consider using him as a one-of. And in a dedicated bestow deck, obviously you could try him in that too. And you can imagine with cards that move gold around or add extra gold, he could get really, really, really big, and that would be funny. Left hand Lucas. So here's another raider. We were talking about they're adding like this raider sort of support with those redesigns that they made, where like now Euron requires a raider to have Intimidate, and the We Take Westeros requires them and stuff. Well, here's a new raider. So 4/3 with stealth and unique, whatever. But his reaction is after no defenders are declared in a challenge where you control an attacking raider, which includes him. He's a raider and he has stealth. So it's easy for him to activate his own ability. That's noteworthy. Place a gold from the treasury on a card. So this, obviously a bestow deck, you try to use him. If you care about raiders, you probably use him there. What I'm trying to think about is what is the possibility to use him as like a splash card in non-bestow decks. And I think it would be possible if you're using like Begging Brother, Flea Bottom, and maybe, I don't know, if you could think of 1 or 2 other bestow cards to toss in there somehow, maybe he'd be playable. I do like the idea, though, of using this guy to put more gold onto Begging Brothers or Flea Bottom. And now I'm wishing that I had gone through and looked for the bestow keyword for the factions. Maybe I can actually do that. Oh yeah, Seized by the Guard. Although this isn't really that good. But yeah, I think it could work. outside of dedicated bestow if you can find enough other bestow cards that are like generally decent enough on their own. Basically cards that can function without having to be supported by other cards of the specific theme, but they get powered up if they can find the support. I don't know if that makes sense. I think you might be able to do it. I mean, you could toss in an Iron Bank, and if you get a gold on that, that's pretty good. Now I'd have to look here. There's the Saltcliffe. Oh, you could give characters stealth with Saltcliffe Sailor. But I mean, you're Greyjoy. You have easier ways to get stealth probably. Buffing silences crew. This is a decent ability. You could try it. It probably wouldn't be that great, but you could give it a shot. Cragorn is bestow 3, 2, and 2 intrigue, and discard 1 gold. Okay, this is where things start to get pretty interesting. This is a card that I think would be played in a lot of decks without needing any bestow support. This is what I was talking about. Because discard 1 gold from this guy. He's a raider, so again, he can enable his own ability. Discard 1 gold from a raider to search the top 10 for an item or weapon with 3 or lower and put it into play. So there's a lot of potential for that to be very good. And like that's an example of a card where, yeah, you might be fine just tossing one of these into your deck, even if there's no other bestow cards that go along with him, just because of how good that could potentially be. Not sure if I want to look through all the item and weapon attachments again. Let's close that. But I can think of off the top of my head, what is the Dragon Binder? Yeah, that's something. Oh man, now I kind of want to look through them all again, right? But you can think of a lot of uses for that. That could definitely be good. Maybe at some point I'll go into more detail with all of these. Although I guess, I mean, if I'm going to make this video, I should do it now. So let's look at the item and weapons. And, I mean, Greyjoy attachment decks, have those ever been a thing? Not really. But certainly if you want to use the attachment agendas with Greyjoy, this card buffs that by a lot and makes that a lot more viable. And notably, this doesn't have... Oh, printing... Actually, I should ask, how does this interact with Pinch of Powder? Printed costs 3 or lower. Because if this can put Pinch of Powder into play, that makes it even better. Like, that's very scary. Yeah, Archmaester's 7-pointed. I guess there's not that many great options for Greyjoy. Now, how is Throwing Axe not here? Throwing Axe has to be a weapon, right? But I don't see Throwing Axe listed. I mean, Throwing Axe is obviously a possibility. People would have to be scared to defend if they thought you might Throwing Axe them. That's because I put item, not weapon. Driftwood. I don't know. I want this to be good, and now I'm looking at what the actual options for weapon cards are, and it's like, they're not that great. Red Rain's not really that good. It's one of those things that I want it to be good. Notably, he is non-loyal, so maybe someday you'll have Banner Watch or something, and your Cragorn will be putting Catapult on the Wall into play. That could be really disgusting. Stark, Banner of Greyjoy, you can put ice into play with that ability. That would be really gross. There's definitely some things you could do that would be funny. Adam Marbrand, Lannister 5 and 4. So he's a knight, so more knight support. And here's their army support, I guess, because I think they've mentioned wanting to do like war plots and army stuff along those lines. He works with that. After an army or knight card enters play under your control, Adam Marbrand gains 1 gold. And then reaction, after a character enters your discard pile, discard 1 gold from Adam Marbrand to return it to your hand. So again, notably, he enables his own ability to an extent. Like he could stack up enough gold on himself, and then you could just return any character that you discard to your hand by discarding that gold. You can activate it with Goldmine, putting aside all the other potential ways for characters to enter your discard pile. Just using Goldmine with this would already be really efficient. And so you could use Goldmine to like discard Burned Men and get them straight back to your hand and draw a card. That'd be good. And that only takes 2 gold on him, so it doesn't require a lot. So definitely in a knight deck, I think you'd use him. And then after that, it's a question of just how many knights are you going to have in your Lannister deck. And if the answer is enough, then he's probably worth looking at. Sir Horace Swift, 4-4 with only power. So his stats are bad. That's, only having one icon is bad, especially because it's only a power icon. But he does have +1 income. That's decent. Maybe that offsets it. Really, it's his action. Move 1 gold from your gold pool to a card without gold. Is that good? Does that mean anything? I think he's only played in Bestow decks, and I question whether he's worth it there, but definitely that's the only place I'd try. He does have an interesting combination of traits. You can see them putting again, they're trying to like bring Small Council back. So Night Lord and Small Council. Maybe those matter, but really, I don't know. He doesn't seem that great. Again, maybe for Bestow. So here is a card that is not a Bestow card. Milario of Norvos, who this says this is Duran Martel's wife, which is funny. I've never heard of her. I guess she doesn't have a big role. Cost 4, 3 and 2 icons. Lady. While Ariane Martel is in your hand, reduce the cost of Marshal by 1. That by itself is pretty good because you can think of the Corset Ariane, obviously, but also the 7-cost version. Both of those, you marshal them out multiple times. So their cost being reduced by her is pretty nice. And then also, while you control Duran, immune to opponent's plot effects, that's notable because she functions as a way for, Duran will ignore Valar Dohaeris then. That will make it way scarier. Like if you have 7-cost Duran Martel, I mean, any version of him, but the 7-cost is the scary version to me. Now they're going to have to think twice about playing Valar Dohaeris on that, because he'll just ignore it and you'll keep 17 gold worth of cards. Then it's like not nearly as effective. Quinton Martel +2. Is Quinton ever worth playing? Not that I've ever seen. Oh wait, Trystane. No, that Trystane is the one that's really bad, because he only has 1 card. Like there's no other versions of him, right? Yeah, I think he's a court. No, he's Lions of Cashley Rock. So he's an early card. He has a really weird, janky ability that's not very good. Other than that, he's just like 4/4, 2 icons, and Lord. So maybe you could play him in this Lord and Ladies deck just for his cost and stats. And as a one of, I guess he'd be okay. Quinton can get +2 strength. So, and like they say, this is meant to support the Martel Lords and Ladies, which is one of my like pet themes. I like to make Martel Lord and Ladies decks and drive them around. And I've very rarely, if ever, seen anyone else that had any interest in doing that. So I'm excited to see support for that. She is herself also a lady, so she'll go into those decks, and I'll probably have fun with her. The Tattered Prince. So this is a triple icon. Tricons are pretty rare. This is a Shadows card. He has a lot going on. He's 3, and with Shadow, I guess he'd be 5 because 2 + 3. Oh no, Shadow 2. That's how that works. So he's 3, or you can pay 4 to do Shadows with him. He's also Bestow 2 and Renown, but forced reaction after a plot card enters your used pile, return the Shadows unless you discard 1 gold from him. Oh man, there's a lot going on with this card. He's Mercenary, he's not a Knight. He has good stats. I think he goes in Shadow decks for sure. You don't mind having 1 copy of him because he's Shadow 2, and Shadow decks already, in a lot of cases, like to play a lot of resets and don't mind clearing the board. So having a card, even if you just never bestow him for any and he just bounces the Shadows every turn, I think Martel's fine with that. And I think there's a possibility, I mean, now I'm thinking about it, he's even if you play him from Shadows, you never bestow him, pretend he doesn't have bestow. He's triple icon with Renown that bounces in and out of Shadows every turn and just constantly dodges resets. Or does he? Actually, this is important because it's after a plot card enters your used pile. And I don't think it enters the used. Yes, his ability triggers after when revealed. Okay, I take it all back then. He can't dodge resets. Everything I said doesn't apply. That would have been the big deal. I don't know then. They say he's very versatile and can be used in lots of different decks, Shadows, Bestow, or Good Stuff. I'm more skeptical of the Good Stuff claim now that he can't dodge Valars. I don't know. Maybe Shadows, maybe Bestow. We'll see. It's hard for me to say at a glance where he would go or what he would do. Definitely a card that's worth thinking about and looking at. Daiwin, so this is a 6 and 4 strength, a very hated stat line. I'm not a fan of it. It's not as bad now that they nerfed Drogon, but Dracarys does still exist. So he's a ranger. Having an intrigue icon is really good. All the rangers that only have military, that just feels so bad. Stealth, and each Night's Watch character you control with stealth does not kneel when declared as an attacker in a military challenge. So again, this is a character that includes himself. So he has stealth, he himself does not kneel to attack in military, and then he can do intrigue or defend military or whatever. And he gives you +1 reserve, but do you really care about +1 reserve? Nah, who cares? Aggressive Night's Watch decks will use this card. As they point out, probably any ranger deck will use him because a ranger that fits the trait and is a non-kneeling attacker, that's pretty good. You'll probably be happy to have that. Like Sea of Blood's gonna have him. Crossing decks could have him. He's not gonna go in the typical Night's Watch deck. So the usual Night's Watch decks is it's attrition or it's the wall with builders and something like that. He obviously doesn't fit in those decks, but there are some archetypes for Night's Watch that aren't used that often and usually haven't proven to be that good, but which can be fun, where he could fit. Leathers, this is another ranger with military intrigue, 4 and 3, and he's a wildling. And this card is interesting. So each wildling character you control gains the Night's Watch affiliation. That's cool. That's not really a big deal. It doesn't matter that much. It does mean that there's a lot of attachments in Night's Watch that can only go on Night's Watch characters, and Practice Blade might be one of them. I mean, most wildlings have a military icon anyways. I guess you can give Dala a military icon with this, but you can imagine there's a lot of other Night's Watch attachments that have to go on Night's Watch characters, so now you can put them on your neutral wildlings. Does that matter? I don't know. I don't think that's really a big thing. Even if you were relying on that, it's inconsistent. That's kind of like a flavor ability. The real thing that you're after here is after he enters play, search your deck for a giant character. So either Mag the Mighty or 1/1, reveal it and add it to your hand, and he gives each giant character an intrigue. So now your Mag the Mighty has 2 icons. You can do intrigue with Mag, or 1/1 has an intrigue icon, and your 11 strength 1/1 can now do challenges by himself, which is a pretty big buff to a previously pretty bad card. This is to a point where I wonder, would you splash this in one copy of 1/1 just because he goes and pulls? Probably not. You probably wouldn't splash it in any random deck. But as they point out here for like Reigns of Castamere, yeah, he's going to be in there. Wildling decks will probably play him because it makes the giants more playable. I do like the idea of the card, and I can see some meme decks that he would be pretty effective in. Effective, maybe the deck would be bad, but within the deck, his ability would be put to very good use. Rickard Karstark. Now, this is one of the main characters. Characters. I guess most of these are characters. One of the main cards in the pack. Now, are they all characters in this pack? I mean, there's like a plot, but Polarion. Oh, the images are broken for the Targaryen cards. Not sure what happened there. And the other, yeah. So all of the in-faction cards for the pack, they're all characters. That's fine. I mean, I'm sure if they ever make more cards, they'll make more attachments and events and whatever. Anyways, back to Rickard. This is one of the ones that I was looking at where it's like, all right, this is a power level where, this could really go in a lot of Start Good Stuff decks. So first of all, he has good stats, 5/5 and Lord. And it's Kneel of the North location to have each player sacrifice a character location. Depending on how things shake out, it's easily possible that'll just be randomly good. Like, that'll be an ability that you won't mind just being able to randomly pull off when it's to your advantage to do it. Especially if you combine him with Winter Plots, more winter support, and you're returning locations from your discard pile back to your hand so that you can keep using his ability again and again. The combos with Flea Bottom or any other type of sacrifice stuff are obviously pretty, don't need any explaining. He can trigger the core set Robb Stark. I think he's going to be in a lot of Stark decks. Attrition decks obviously will probably use him because he's forcing the opponent to sacrifice stuff off of their board. This is a character that I think will be used a lot. Harwin, this is interesting. He's a Stark card, but he's Brotherhood and R'hllor. That's pretty weird. So 3 and 3, bestow 2, no attachments except Warhorse. That's a weird condition. And technically that's a keyword, right? How many cards have no attachments except Warhorse? I feel like he might be the only one. Anyways, action during a challenge. This is a weird ability. During a challenge in which you control a participating non-loyal character, discard 1 gold from Harwin to choose a character you control with 2 or more keywords and have it participate in challenge turns. So there's a lot of conditions there. They have to be non-loyal and they have to have 2 or more keywords. So obviously this is meant for Brotherhood decks, and I think it's pretty obvious how he applies in like how his ability works in those decks. You use your agenda to give keywords to a neutral character, and then you can use Harwin to have them participate in challenges on your side. And because Brotherhood decks requires neutral characters, of course they're going to be non-loyal. And it's notable that you don't have to kneel the character. This is an effect that just has them participate. It doesn't matter if they're standing or kneeling. So that's a pretty powerful effect when you can pull it off. Is it going to be good? Oh, well, they point out here another good deck type for it, Direwolf decks, because no attachments is a keyword. So your Direwolves that have stealth or intimidate and no attachments, this can get them into challenges as well. And that's pretty important because one problem with Direwolf decks is they tend to just have military icons. So that's notable. That's another sort of not very used theme that can be supported by this. Then this is another case where I don't think I'm going to do it this time. I always say that and always end up doing it. But I'd have to go through and see like what non-loyal characters with multiple keywords does Stark have. One thing I will note is he can still work with I Am No One. So like you use I Am No One to give a character insight, and if they have another keyword on top of that, then they would qualify for his ability. That's interesting, I guess. Resnack Mo Resnack. That's a funny name. I cannot remember what the trait was. I think his trait is Steward, but he's one of the Wise Masters. That's what they're called. Oh, but I can't see the card. Now what? This is a problem. I can't review the card if I can't actually see what's on the card. What did you guys do? Is the site just broken? All right, here it comes. No, why is it broken? Man. My review is ruined. Like, how is there any way I can see this card? Oh, geez, that feels bad. What's going on? This is the article I found of Article Archives. Guess right. Now, maybe these... I think these cards are in here. Oh, we're saved. They're on Thrones DB. Thank goodness. So maybe they're changing the artwork. I don't know. Resnack, Mo Resnack. So 4-2, bad stats. Oh, he's ally as well. Ally and Steward. But obviously the ability is what you're looking at. Bestow 3, and after a character is discarded from your hand, he gains 1 gold. Then you may discard X gold to put that character into play from your discard pile, where X is that character's cost. So let me compare this to the Adam Marbrand card. Oh, this is totally different. I was getting Marbrand confused with this card. Marbrand is just discard 1 gold from him to return it to your hand, and you don't have to match the character's cost. I was thinking you had to discard gold from Marbrand equal to how much it costed, which obviously you don't have to. Well, that makes Marbrand a lot better. This is a pretty decent card just in general then, because even if you're only getting a couple gold on him per game, you don't have to have a lot. Triggering his reaction twice in a game is pretty good. That would be +2 cards. That makes him nice. So this is a considerably pretty strong card then. Definitely worth looking at. Resnack is the one that has the condition because it puts it into play. So that's why you have to actually pay the cost. So this is either for bestow decks or for discard decks, and you're gonna have to discard a lot to make him worth it. But if you trigger him even once on a cost 3 or 4 character that comes out of your discard and comes into play, basically stuff above the flea bottom range, and even in flea bottom decks, I mean, maybe you'll want 1 copy of him, because you're going to be ideally discarding characters anyways in that deck, right? Although this does say it has to be discarded from your hand. So I think with Marbrand, yes, after a character enters your discard pile. So with Marbrand, you could get a character discarded by March to the Wall and still put it back in your hands. That's pretty important. Yeah. But if you're discarding enough characters from your hand, one way or the other, whether it's intrigue, claim, or whatever, and you get to trigger him with like 4 gold, he's pretty good. It's a question of how consistent is that going to be. I guess we'll find out. The next broken card I think was Halden Halfmaester. It's like a Targaryen Maester. Yeah, there he is. So this is a 3/2 Maester, and he's companion. That matters for Daario Naharis, and there might be 1 or 2 other cards that it matters for. Anyways, after you win a challenge in which he's participating, reveal the top card of your deck, place 1 gold from the treasury on a card with the same card type. If it's an event, draw it, or if it's Aegon, put him into play. I think, let me see if Aegon is only when he comes out of Shadows, or if it's enters play. Yeah, he's enters play, so if you put Aegon into play with that effect, then his reaction goes off. That's pretty good. Is it worth it to have him in your deck only for that? Probably not. So then it's a question of whether you're a bestow deck or an event-heavy deck. If it's an event-heavy deck, let me recall if you have to kneel him or if you can just do it. Oh, you have to win a challenge with him. I guess that's better than having to kneel him. Not as good as being able to just do it. It's fine. And yeah, this does combo with the Maester agenda because you can put the card that you want on top of your deck, including putting in events on top. But I'm trying to think about, obviously in a Maester deck you're going to play him. I'm trying to think of other decks that you could play him in. Definitely event-heavy decks, and unfortunately burn decks probably would play him because you want to have the chance to draw one of your like 14 burn events, right? You want to try and draw Dracarys with this. So a burn deck, you could see him being used. He's in the Flea Bottom range. Decent card. For Targaryen, being in the Flea Bottom range always matters, now that Flea Bottom's no longer restricted. Orton Merryweather. Why I say that, I guess we have to find out if Flea Bottom is has been nerfed so much now that it's not worth playing anymore. I feel like that's not true. I think it's still worth a shot if you have enough cards to support it, but I guess I'll have to actually play games with it and find that out. So the Tyrell cards, Orton Merryweather, another 4/2. They like giving characters terrible stats in this pack, but I guess they want to be on the safe side with trying to balance these abilities. A lot of these abilities, they're either complicated, like the cards have a lot of text, or they're just powerful abilities, or both. Here, this guy has 5 lines of text on his ability. This guy has 2 abilities. This guy has 2 abilities, technically 3, but, it's basically 2. I know Marbrand had 2, right? Yeah, Marbrand has 2. So these are pretty complicated cards. I can understand wanting to be more conservative with the stats. And here comes the Small Council again. So he's Lord and Small Council. After a player marshals or plays a Small Council card, again, notably, he triggers himself, return an event from your discard pile to your hand. Limit once per phase, sure. And then interrupt when Orton Merryweather leaves play. Put a non-unique spy character into play from your hand. I think he would be good and be played even with only that first ability. First of all, because marshal 4 cost and get an event back to your hand. That's potentially worth it in a lot of decks. You could get what is that event that gives you 5 gold? The Bounty of Highgarden, like in a rush deck, you could get that back. You can get your Growing Strong back. That card advantage that you could get there could potentially make up for the stats by itself. Even more so with the Marjorie Tyrell that switches lords in and out, the 6-cost Marjorie Tyrell, which has been a backbone card of a lot of really powerful Tyrell decks. Obviously, he goes great with that because he's sort of cheap. He's 4. He's on the less expensive side. He's completely expendable because both of his abilities trigger when he comes into and out of play. It's like you're getting the most value out of him if he gets into play, does his reaction, and then goes out of play to trigger his interrupts at a relevant time before the game ends. So he's perfect for those decks. He's always going to be a 1-of in those decks. And of course, I have to look now at the spy condition there. I believe Hightower Spy by itself, again, he's, I think, viable without this second ability down here. This is just gravy. So the fact that you could possibly use it with Hightower Spy already makes him worth consideration. And what else is there? Oh no! Varys is a spy. Are you serious? When Orton Merryweather leaves play... Oh, it has to be non-unique. Okay, we're saved. That would have been terrible. Wow, Tyrell is the spy faction. I did not realize Tyrell had all the spies. And are these all non-unique? I didn't realize that either. They're all non-unique. Oh, Old Town Informer, my favorite card. Alright, this card is good. You can put Old Town Informer in. Olenna's Informant, yeah, that's a card people use. Shrewd Diplomat, maybe not so much. Yeah, this would be really hard to time with his ability. You would have to have something that could, like, bounce him on command. Notably, though, what you could do, this is shows another way that this card is, you know, it has all these different uses. You can Iron Bank this guy, and his interrupts, you could use that in the middle of a challenge to put your Shrewd Diplomat in, which normally costs you 5. You just got it in for free and gained 4 gold with Iron Bank, and you used the reaction to screw up their challenge. And then now he's back in your hand, which is where you want him, because you can potentially marshal him again and get his reaction again, and then maybe later his interrupt again, and like get even more value out of him. That's pretty cool. And that's assuming that his reaction only ever triggers off of himself, you know. If you actually have other small council cards in your deck somehow, then he has the potential to be even better. You know, maybe event decks will try to play him with, man, that small council event, right? Ah, this is making me mad. Why is it not letting me search for certain words? No, what's going on? Alright, I think it's the council consents. Yes, I remembered perfectly. Your event decks, clearly... you're going to play this with, like, Reigns of Castamere and a million events, and it's going to be the best thing ever. Probably not, but theoretically, right? So, I wonder how the timing would work if you play this small council event. Could you then use his reaction to return the council consents to your hand, or would it have to be a different card? That's something I should ask. Anyways, let's try and finish this video off. This is going to be another long one, but what can I say? Sir Emon Qui? I know he's Rainbow Guard. As they mentioned in the comment, they introduced the Rainbow Guard trait, and they're adding King's Guard. So they're like making Rainbow Guards equal to King's Guards, which I think is totally fair. So he's King's Guard and Knight, and Rainbow Guard, I mean, that's like a flavor text for now. Bestow 1. After you initiate a challenge, discard 1 gold to raise the claim value by 1. Then if he has no gold, kill him. And he only has a military icon. So by himself... in order to use his ability, you just bestow him once, and you can raise your military claim once, and then he kills himself. Which, okay, I mean, you could, since he's only a 2 cost, you would still play that in aggro decks. Tyrell's usually not a military aggro faction, so that's kind of not, you know, that's like anti-synergy, I guess. But that would be a card that would be used in certain types of decks by itself, but wouldn't really be anything special. Now, this is where the bestow can get scary, and where the bestow, like, we're playing with the bestow mechanic, you know, you could see it being justified having to pay that extra gold, because if you get extra gold onto him where he's raising claim and then he stays in play and he's threatening to raise the claim again next turn and just keep doing it because you're able to feed more gold onto him, that's when he gets scary. So raising claim is a really scary mechanic. Obviously, what is that agenda? The Wildling agenda? The Free Folk proved that, even though, I mean, that wasn't technically raising claim, it was applying claim twice, but it was deadly because of the possibility to play 2 claim. That agenda would not be as scary if you could only have 1 claim. Winter is Coming is still a staple event in Stark that's like, there's almost no Stark decks where you would go wrong by putting that in, because raising claim is just really good. So this is definitely a card to look at, both in terms of bestow, but another thing you can also think about is adding icons. If you have a way to add intrigue and power icons onto him, that is also a thing. You see, I was trying to think if there was a way to, how do I say, like, use his ability and then bounce him to hand, but he kills himself immediately after using his ability. It's not at the end of the challenge, and that's notable too, because that means you're going to have other characters to help him win the challenge. So yeah, maybe he's just bad if you don't have support, but if you have support, I think this is a scary card. Oh, Vargo Holt. It is weird that he never got a card before now. I mean, he's even like a character in the show. He should have had a card, right? And they gave him quite a card. I think he is a 6/5 with 3 icons. Neutral, of course. Yeah, 6/5 with all 3 icons. So that's pretty good stats already. Mercenary. Oh, man, I moved my cursor. He bestows 2. Reaction after a card with bestow enters play, it gains 1 gold. So again, there's that mechanic of having ways to cheat gold on the cards without paying for it directly out of your gold pool that could make this bestow mechanic more viable. Like that right there makes him sort of, if you were going to play like a dedicated bestow deck, he'd be kind of a centerpiece. That's very notable that he can do that. And, maybe that will be strong enough. Unfortunately, he's a 6 cost that can't take bodyguards. So if you're trying to rely on him, you're going to have to really hope you get a duplicate or have some other way to protect him. But still, I would say that adds a lot of viability to bestow. It makes it to a point where I'd be a lot more optimistic about trying to play around with it. And then he also has the action where you move 1 gold from him to a character with 2 or less gold, and until the end of the phase, he gains their keywords. Which makes sense because he doesn't have any other keywords besides bestow. For a 6 cost character, that's not great. The fact that he has 3 icons kind of makes up for that. But definitely if you can use that to steal like Intimidate or Renown and things like that, then he also becomes a card with really good stats at that point. So, then you're looking at comparing him to a card like Euron Crozai, who has 3 icons and then either Intimidate or Renown and different stuff like that going on. And again, notably, this makes him probably an auto-include for Brotherhood decks. I remember my Brotherhood decks. I had a lot of fun with those decks. And if I ever get around to making those again, I'll look forward to having this card in there. Probably replacing some of the less efficient, big, expensive neutral characters. Because I'll be giving stuff keywords, and this guy will be using his action to steal those keywords, and it's going to be fun. He also combos with Harwin. Let's remember Harwin. Yeah, Harwin, you have to find a character with 2 or more keywords. So you can imagine a character, you get 2 keywords onto it somehow. It's got Renown and Intimidate or something. Isn't there a card that has Renown and Intimidate? It's Victarion Greyjoy. That's it. Victarion has Renown and Intimidate just printed on him. Anyways, you get the 2 keywords. You get them into 2 challenges with Harwin. Then you steal the keywords so that Vargo also has them. And you're also doing, that's too much gold. It's too many characters for that to really be a thing, but that'd be funny. Oh, Balerion. Apparently people were complaining about this card, Balerion. I saw a comment to the effect that people were mad about it, which I don't quite understand. This is a weird card. So he's 2 neutral character with just 1 strength military icon. Ambush 2, no attachments except cat. So you can put an intrigue icon onto him with Sir Pounce, I think. That's funny, I guess. I guess I can see how he would be annoying. Yeah, and he has cannot be killed. And so what I was thinking was, okay, cannot be killed, so he survives Morghulis. I mean, you can't use him to claim soak, so that's a big difference between cards like Maester Aemon. That's actually not as bad as it sounds, because again, you still have to actually fulfill military claim and kill your other characters that you almost care about. I mean, almost certainly will care about more than this one. But yeah, even if you have him on the board permanently, a 1 strength military icon is just not very impactful. Is that really worth it? That probably wouldn't be. But if you get an intrigue onto him with Sir Pounce, and I think Sir Pounce makes it where they don't kneel to attack. Yeah, this is the only other cat card in the game. Yes, does not kneel when declared as an intrigue attacker. So a card that doesn't kneel to attack an intrigue and then also does military that can't be killed is considerably stronger than one that's just a 1 strength military. Is that broken? Again, I really hesitate to say that it is. He's still hit by Valar Dohaeris. He's still hit by the First Snow of Winter. You can discard Sir Pounce if you're that mad about it. Is it really that hard for Lannister to find other characters to put Sir Pounce on that have more than 1 strength? That's funny, but I don't think it's a huge threat. Basically, this is a card that's here to counter Bestow. They say he serves as a counter to the Bestow support. Even if you're up against Bestow decks, is he good even then with his action that he can kneel to discard a gold from something? I don't know. I would definitely say if you're ever going to use this card for any purpose except just for memeing on people, it would be because you're scared of Bestow. And I don't know if it'd be worth it even then, but that would be the only time that I would probably consider this card again, other than just the fact that it's funny. And I do appreciate the card, even if it's not good mechanically, like it's not strong. It's just a funny card. It would be funny to have one copy of this in a deck and marshal it, and the opponent just pauses and like, what the hell is that? Free companies. Oh, this is an agenda. This is the new agenda they made, I think. Which is like a mercenary agenda, I think. Each neutral character you control gets -1 strength if it has no gold. Yeah, so you can see this is the Bestow agenda. Obviously, I'm going to have to make some decks with this when you're able to play with it. Action, kneel your faction card to place 1 gold from the treasury on either a card without gold or a mercenary character. So you can get gold onto your empty Bestow cards with this, and you can stack gold, but it has to be on mercenaries. So it's like mercenary and Bestow. Each neutral character you control. I mean, you could play this agenda, the way this is worded, you could play this agenda with no neutral characters. Then it doesn't have a drawback, and I guess their reasoning is they've made it to where the juiciness of a character like Vargo Hoat, you're not going to be able to resist. You're just going to have to play with him. But if your deck is only like neutral, like a few neutral mercenaries and everything else is in faction, that downside is really easy to get around, because this does not require you to use neutral characters. I could just make a Bestow deck with all in-faction characters, and then it has no downside. Now the question becomes, is the upside powerful enough at that point that this agenda is something to be scared of? It's definitely a fun agenda. It does have a faction card kneel, which is appropriate. So it's like an economy agenda for a Bestow deck. I'll just have to try it out, and then I'll have more to say about it then. Obviously, they are putting cards out that you can see how they would fit together to form a thematic deck under this agenda. Would that deck actually be good? We will find out. But because Flea Bottom is now a Bestow card, I look forward to making this agenda and big-time Flea Bottom decks. I'm going to be doing that. The last card is the Pointy End. I like this plot because, as they point out, they've designed this to counter deck types that are very powerful and that are often very difficult to deal with, that typically require specific answers. So it's 4-3-1-5. Decent stats, not great, but playable. And when revealed, choose a character. If there are 2 or more attachments, discard each attachment. Otherwise, discard each duplicate and each power from it. So this is supposed to counter Rush, duplicates, and Voltron. I think it's basically a thing to stop Voltron decks. Is this going to be enough to stop a Rush deck, like a Lannister Crossing, compared to other plot options that are out there? I doubt it. Like, oh man, I'm going to discard 3 power off your Cersei. Maybe that delays them by 1 turn, but there's a ton of other plots I can think of that would delay them by a turn in a more impactful fashion. Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure if I started going down the list. Yeah, like Barring the Gates, that's going to slow them down. I was thinking about that the other day. It's my new deck I made has Barring the Gates in it. But yeah, now when it comes to stopping the Voltron decks, though, like a deck that I played against today, and I did manage to beat the deck due to Pinch of Powder. But without Pinch of Powder, I probably would have lost. I was playing against Baratheon Qohor, and on turn 1, they had Robert with like 4 attachments on him or something stupid like that. And then I just pinched him and they lost. But, you know, that's a situation where other plots cannot really match how strong this would be of targeting him and discarding like 3 or 4 attachments off of him. That would be huge and potentially game deciding against a Qohor deck like that. So I can see this as a counter plot to that strategy. You know, if people they're playing the Jon Snow that has 5 million attachments, you can discard all their BS, including the Queen's Guard. That's great. It's way better than Confiscation. You're having to deal with Daenerys that has all the titles. You can counter that. So I do like that. There's something specific that's annoying, really powerful, and hard to deal with, and there wasn't really any other counters to it that are as strong as this. I like that about it. Discarding duplicates is... I mean, there's already a plot that discarded duplicates, right? I mean, this has more versatility than that because it does other things too, but I guess... I don't know how big of a deal that is, really. Or is your attrition deck going to run this to discard their duplicates before you play Valor Morghulis? Maybe. I guess we'll find out. But I feel, again, there was already a plot that did that, and I don't think it really ever got any play. I think it was Battle of the Blackwater. So that's probably an afterthought. I think this is basically to counter Voltron, which is good. Voltron is kind of lame. I'm not a big fan of it, so I'm fine with having better counters to it. So yep, to sum up what is probably a very long, unnecessary video, I like all these cards. I look forward to playing with all of them. It seems well designed to me. We'll see what happens. I guess it's probably inevitable that at some point something is going to feel broken or whatever, but I'm confident that this design team can do a better job than Fantasy Flight. Because I shouldn't say this, but it's like, oh, they're going to do better than Fantasy Flight. Well, it's not that high of a bar to clear. I shouldn't say that. Fantasy Flight did good. What am I talking about? I like this game. All right, I'm done.